Hello and welcome to A Sunny Book Nook. Today I'm going to be doing my January wrap-up. I actually wrote full-length written reviews of many of these books, all of them, because my goal is to write a full-length written review of every book that I read this year. On my Bindery page, and it's just a public post for free followers and for anyone. Always have my Bindery link down below, which, you should sign up for if you want. I make bonus videos there for $5 a month. You can get like an extra bonus video or so every month. And I also run a book club there via the Discord on Bindery that is connected to my page. Anyways, that's my little Bindery plug. For $12 a month, I'm hoping to run a sort of seminar style book club over Zoom with the books that we read throughout the year or so. But I read 8 books in the month of January, which is fewer than I usually read. Like, that's actually a very small number for typically like the amount that I'm reading, especially in January. Like, I think last year it probably was up in like the 20s or something, and the year before that and the year before that probably. But I think I've been taking things at a slower pace because I'm wanting to write thoughtful, full-length reviews of these books, as well as the fact that after years of reading, if you heard the buzzing in the background, that was my laptop. No, it stopped buzzing. After years of reading, many years of reading at this point, I think my discernment regarding whether I should just not finish a book, it's very well honed at this point, which means that I'm starting probably a dozen books and then just putting them down after the first like 5% of it. So instead of like finishing more because I'm starting more, I'm just finishing less while still starting, I guess. And also because I never want reading to be a chore. I do it because it's fun and I like to, and it is a hobby that I enjoy. So I'm not gonna force myself to do stuff I don't want to do. We already force ourselves to do a lot of things in order to live and survive in this world. So the first book that I read in January is a book that I physically own, but it's in St. Louis, and I am currently in Boston, as you can tell here, if you know my setup. But yeah, I read Body Horror, Capitalism, Fear, Misogyny, Jokes. I'm looking at my iPad here. By Anne Elizabeth Moore. I rated this book 4 stars. I thought that this book as an essay collection really tries to speak to a lot of different concepts at once. Disability, feminism, labor organizing, being a writer and an artist as a woman. All of these things are intermingled together throughout the course of each of these essays, and I actually do a breakdown of each specific essay in my Bindery review post, because basically on my Bindery review post I did like a newsletter of like 5 books that I read in January, and my reviews of them, it's pretty lengthy of course. So these next books I'm going to be talking about I've already written and posted reviews of, so just keep that in mind. But Body Horror really speaks to what it's like to like get cancer and lose friends because of it, and an essay that speaks to the history of patent law, and also her being a single woman who doesn't have kids, and like the way that people are insistent that she should have kids, and just things that intermingle her journalist writing perspective and then of course her personal type memoir stuff, and each essay itself kind of stands on its own in addressing any specific topic. And yeah, I liked it. It didn't really blow me out of the water, but I did cry a few times at this because of the way that she writes about chronic illness, chronic pain, sickness in general, dying, confronting these things in your life and the discomfort others have at that. And yeah, it was pretty moving at points, but at other points I think that some of the humor didn't really land with me. It felt a little repetitive at some points, but in general I enjoyed it. And I would recommend it. The next book that I read was Come and Get It by Kiley Reid of Such a Fun Age. She wrote that. I read Come and Get It via the Libro FM ALC influencer program, so thank you so much to them. I have an affiliate link down below. You don't have to use it, but is just there. Come and Get It was really interesting. I rated it 4 stars as well. I actually think I rated basically every book I read in January 4 stars or 3.5 stars, with the exception of one that I'm gonna get to. But Come and Get It is a like sort of literary fiction contemporary novel that follows 3 different women's perspectives at this, I think, Arkansas University. And so it's set in like the South and the Southern State University culture of this world being perceived through kind of a myopic lens of 3 different characters was really fascinating to see. I felt like the portrayal of college life and college relationships in this book were spot on. Like, the dialogue is realistic and at many times absolutely hilarious, and the writing style that Reid cultivated in such a fun age is very evident here in the way that the internal sort of monologues and dialogues of the characters and what shaped them and their experiences are brought to the forefront of the page, and we really understand and care about them. Or at least, if we don't care about them because they're a bad person, or at least, you know, kind of morally condemnable, you know, we understand where they're coming from and sort of the delusion that they live in. Because in Such a Fun Age, like Alex or whatever the fuck, like her white woman perspective, cringeworthy is not even just like an apt description in this scenario because it's so bad. And I think something similar happens within the alternating of these 3 perspectives, because one of them is a more mature sort of voice and perspective because she's a 38-year-old woman named Agatha, and she is a visiting professor at this university. Then we follow the perspective of Millie, is an RA. She is black. She's like one of the only black people who live on her floor, and she obviously is the RA. She sort of delayed going to school or going back to school, so now she's like a senior who's like 23 years old. And she's a pretty good RA. Like, she kind of takes her job seriously, and she's a nice, smart, hardworking person. Then there's Kennedy, who, oh my god, she got on my fucking nerves. She's this white girl transfer student who lives in the suite kind of like next door to Millie's room, and in the suite there's like 3 other girls who live there with her, and she doesn't like, she's not friendly with any of them, but the 3 of them are friendly with each other kind of without her. And so she's kind of existing at this like outside status at the perimeter of college life, and she's incredibly lonely and sad. She's reeling from an event that is why she transferred from a different university here, and the way that we slowly uncover the past of Kennedy as a character makes her more sympathetic. But I mean, emphasis on pathetic, but Agatha is a really interesting, morally ambiguous character, because at the very beginning of the book, we open with her perspective, and kind of more incrementally and earlier than the other characters. Well, besides Millie. Millie is sort of like up front. We get everything. We get everything about Millie's like backstory within the 2nd chapter, essentially. Whereas Kennedy, we get her backstory very slowly. Agatha, we get her backstory incrementally and pretty steadily throughout the course of the book, which actually like kind of reflects who they are. Like, it's not that Millie is a simple character, but it's kind of like she is like what you see is what you get. And we understand that throughout the course of the novel, and it's written in such a way so that that's evident, especially in the structure of like, we understand her, you know, where she's coming from like pretty immediately, and like sort of her approach to the world, and then we see her change and evolve from that. Whereas Agatha is more complicated in the way that she is coming off of the heels of a toxic relationship that didn't become toxic until kind of the progression of their dynamic, because her wife, who they haven't divorced yet because her wife needs health insurance, hence like the problems that they have in their relationship, because her wife Robin is a black woman who's a dancer, very enigmatic as a character and person, but just kind of irresponsible as an adult financially and kind of immature emotionally. Hence Agatha and Robin's like breakup. But Agatha is a visiting professor at Arkansas, the state university, due to the fact that she's kind of like getting away from that relationship, and she's kind of a more East Coast liberal elite type as a professor and academic, which is why like all of her friends and all the people that she know being like, why are you going to Arkansas? Like, which I think is pretty funny and accurate. But yeah, I mean, my full-length review of this book on Bindery it gets pretty spoilery towards the end of it because crazy shit goes down. Like, in Such a Fun Age, I feel like I'm just referencing it a lot because I feel like so many people have read it. The shit that goes down is absolutely wild, like, all the way through. In Come and Get It, it is kind of incremental. Like, of course, in Such a Fun Age, things build up to, like, a certain breaking point, and the same thing happens in Come and Get It, but it's much less bombastic because it is such a microscopic view of college life and like the dramas in living in a dorm and all this. Agatha is involved in this story because she and Millie develop a sort of relationship. It's very interesting. And also Agatha is kind of taking advantage of, exploiting, and sort of getting on the edge of journalistic integrity. In fact, she's very much breaking a lot of the expected rules of it, due to the fact that she is literally sitting in Millie's room and eavesdropping on the girls next door and writing articles for Teen Vogue about it. Yeah. Basically, this book is pretty funny in the wild shit that goes down, and I would recommend it if, like, you're the kind of person who enjoys reading a sort of contemporary realistic fiction novel that is about coming of age, whether you are a young adult or 38, and the moral ambiguity of the choices you make in life and why all the little minute things that build into what life is. Yeah, it's pretty good. Then I read another nonfiction essay collection called Some of My Best Friends by Tajja Isen. And this book was a really well-written essay collection. Again, I do a full breakdown of each essay and actually a ranking of all of the essays in my Bindery written review. But this book kind of talks about sort of the virtue signaling involved in being like, some of my best friends are Black, right? Like, Tajja Isen is a biracial Black woman from Canada. And she grew up in the suburbs of Toronto, I believe, and we see her perspective, and we see the ways that she has come to the conclusions as a writer that she has, based off of her upbringing and her education and the fact that she was a voice actor as a child for many years, and the fact that she was someone who went to law school but didn't pursue law, like, all of her perspectives on the inaccessibility or the exclusivity of the publishing industry, or sort of her experience trying to be a writer as a young kid, and also like white women pain, suffering type art. Her perspectives that are really well thought through in all of this, and like it's very evident in the book in how she's quoting other people and name dropping different names that are contemporary and older, that she's a very well read, very smart person. And I would totally recommend this if thinking about post 2020, or like that vantage point of like the racial reckoning, I guess, that happened around the world but focused in the US, has impacted or implicated a lot of different industries, from the voice acting industry to publishing. And Eisen's sort of inside view and perspective on these worlds. I mean, she is an expert in a lot of these things, and she's bringing up and answering a lot of questions that I think are pretty crucial to understand and frame like our current landscape of media consumption and production, and how we approach the issues of women's writing and Black writing and Black art, with what perspectives that we hold with them. And yeah, I think it's very good. It's kind of an aspirationally well done essay collection, I would say, and I would recommend it. And then I read a science fiction novel called Drunk on All Your Strange New Words by Eddie Robson. I rated this book 4 stars as well. I really enjoyed this. I thought that it was such a compelling read, and I very randomly picked it up, I feel like. And it's not that long of a book. I haven't read a super long science fiction or fantasy novel, I don't think, in a very long time, mostly because I just don't have the fucking time for that. Like, I'm sorry, I don't give a fuck. Which is why this book really did it for me, I think, because the pacing and all the different things that we learn and uncover and the world building is done really adeptly, really smoothly. I think it introduces these concepts and technologies that feel familiar even though they're not, because it's set very much so in the future, and it's set in a world where there's a specific type of alien that lives on this or on Earth now, and they don't have the level of technology or technological like savvy as humans, but the way that they can communicate with humans and humanity is through translators, because they don't speak out loud. That is not the way that they communicate. They don't even like have a sign language situation. Like, their body language is very unhuman. I mean, they're aliens. Their body language is very alien, you know? Like, the only way that humans can communicate with them is basically telepathically. But the reason why the book is called Drunk on All Your Strange New Words is because the feeling that you get as a translator, as someone who can communicate with these aliens, because you're highly trained in that, like you went to the specific school for it and everything, when you communicate with them and when you translate for them, when you're, you know, speaking to them in their language, they're called logi or logi, and the language is logisi. When you're trying to communicate what is happening in front of you, or what a person speaking a human language like English to the logi is, the person who is the mediator in communicating what was said in English into logisi to the logi, that makes you feel drunk. Like, it gives you the same feeling of drunkenness as obviously drinking a lot of alcohol, but it doesn't have the sort of negative effects of alcohol, because what you're doing is just communicating with the logi and speaking logisi. It's kind of like a mind share type situation, hence the physiological effects of speaking the language. It's pretty interesting, I think. And this is one of the technologies of this world, is like glasses that function as like phone screens. I thought this book was really compelling because besides those world building elements, the thing that makes this book compelling is the fact that it is ultimately a locked room mystery. It's a murder mystery. Our main character is a human translator for a Logi, who's the cultural attaché for Logi living on Earth in New York. And she lives in his house with him because she kind of has to as his translator. And one day she wakes up and he's been murdered in his room. And it's very interesting because the mindshare type technology, or the mindshare communication style and way of interacting between Logi and human, you're obviously like hearing the voice of that alien in your head. So even though he has died, she starts hearing, his name is Fitz, her boss, who's a Logi. She starts hearing Fitz's voice in her head. She's creeped out. Like, she's like, what the hell is happening? Am I hallucinating? Like, what is going on? And things unravel from there. It's very interesting. She's like going all around the city trying to uncover what seems to be a plot of some sort she's trying to figure out who killed him, all of this. There's the police corruption, there's the dealing with the Logie diplomacy group. I really liked it. I thought it was really compelling. Then I read the memoir, I Survived Capitalism, and all I got was this lousy t-shirt. Everything I Wish I Never Had to Learn About Money by Madeline Pendleton. You probably know Madeline through her TikTok. She makes really informative videos about finances, like, you know, how to live in the world as a broke person, what your budget could look like, how to save for your retirement, things like that. She is also really someone who shares a lot about her experiences growing up in California. At the very beginning of this memoir, she opens with discussing being from Fresno and like what that means and what her upbringing did for her and how it shaped her. Each chapter is following her life from childhood to adult. Like, it's, you know, a memoir, like kid Madeline all the way to adult Madeline now. And at the end of each chapter is sort of the lessons that she learned from that experience of life, and then the advice she gives, like basically in bullet point form, like telling you what to do, like in case you get fired, do A, then B, then C. If C doesn't work, do D. If D doesn't work, try A in this different way. Like, it's practical advice for the common man, essentially. Madeline's experiences growing up in like the California punk scene, in just being like a broke 20-something trying to get by in the fashion industry with a college degree that she regrets going into debt for, is really very compelling and well written. And there also is a major theme in this book at the beginning and about Madeline's previous relationship with a man named Drew who committed suicide. I listened to the audiobook of this, which is narrated by Madeline, of course, and I really recommend it. Her voice like breaks at a certain point when she's talking about Drew, and it's genuinely so heartbreaking. Like, the loss of any of your loved ones, especially to suicide, is incredibly tragic, and it's just so sad, and that loss feels so deep. But the way that she talks about experiencing that, going through it, and I mean, I think she has a title of this, she has like a title of a chapter in here called Capitalism Killed My Boyfriend, and we really see how like that is literally the truth of the situation. I thought that this was so good. It's written in a way that is very conversational and clearly communicates the points that she's trying to make, while also conveying her life story in such a way that goes through like the jobs she had and the relationships she's had and the housing situations she's had. It's refreshingly real, honest, and intimate without feeling too close. It's incredibly vulnerable, but at the same time, it's like vulnerable for a reason. Like, she is presenting all of this in order to give us the advice that she had to learn herself. Like, the advice she wished she knew when she was going through this shit, you know? It's very good. I really recommend it, even if you don't follow Madeline on TikTok, even though I feel like a lot of people do, and you probably should. Yeah, I thought it was really good. Then I read a book called The Center by Ayesha Manazir Siddiqi. I thought that this book was a little crazy. Well, the whole concept is really interesting. Like, basically, our main character is a Pakistani British woman who is dating this like white guy who goes away for 10 days and comes back speaking perfect Urdu. She's like, what the fuck? And he's like, fine, I'm only allowed to tell one person about this my whole life, so this is really special, but there's this place called The Center where you can learn how to speak basically any language completely fluently, flawlessly even, in 10 days. She's like, what the fuck? She's a translator. She really wants to write a translated novel that's like, you know, prize winning and critically acclaimed. But what she's doing right now is just translating sort of like, I think, Hindi TV shows into English or vice versa. And she's feeling unfulfilled. And so she is like, okay, whatever, I'll do this. At the same time, she has a best friend who is another, I think, brown woman who also lives in London with her. And they've been best friends for a long time, and we see their relationship kind of at the center of this as well. Like, I think this is a book about female friendship as much as it is about the way that power and knowledge exists and how race and gender function into it in a really primary way. Simultaneously, it is looking at something that is very specific to like a time, a place, kind of limited in scope, while of course addressing these larger issues without kind of it's not too like on the nose, I guess, because it just feels like these characters are being who they are. They're like human beings who are informed by their experiences, their lives, and what the views and the things they've taken away from that is. It's really interesting, and the speculative element of it leans horror, I would say. And I think that you get a suspicion that builds throughout the course of the novel as to like what the hell is going on. But I don't think the point of the book is to like surprise or gag you about it. In fact, that you do kind of know what's going on while the main character doesn't, at least in my opinion, like speaks to how insidious the nature of power and acquiring it is. Because once you get to a certain point, you can no longer see your own feelings of superiority over others, but more than that, you start living in sort of a level of delusion and denial, because you have to. It requires this level of cognitive dissonance when you're working so hard to get a thing. And I think like that's what this book is ultimately about, I guess. The next book that I read was a short story collection called Tomb Sweeping by Alexandra Chang. I rated this book 3.5 stars. I thought that a lot of these stories were really compelling. I mean, a lot of it focuses on Chinese American life, specifically women's experiences, all across the board, like in so many different circumstances. The first short story was really intriguing for me. I really liked it. In fact, that's what I reference in my Goodreads review of it. Also, you can friend me on Goodreads if you want. Just make sure to answer my challenge question. Otherwise, I don't, like, I'm curious, so. Anyways, basically, this book, because it is a literary fiction, realistic, contemporary novel that occupies all these different perspectives of people who are ordinary and are trying to just get through life in one way or the other. I think because all of the stories follow that sort of line, some of them have just slipped out of memory at this point, whereas others kind of stand out. There's one about an elderly Chinese woman who sort of, I think, like collects recycling from the street. The first story is about this woman who loses her job and then takes on this house sitting gig for this really rich couple upstate or something like that, like somewhere out there in the hills or whatever. And she starts getting these like mysterious notes, or not mysterious notes, like she starts thinking something is going on, and by the end of the story, we don't know what is going on. Like, it's not very clear, and it's not supposed to be. And I think, like, in that way, a lot of these stories felt really abrupt at the ending. Like, it was, like, felt like it was building towards something, and then it didn't really follow through. There was a really interesting, I feel like the first half of the short story collection was more interesting and compelling than the second half. There's a really good story, I think, about a woman in Shanghai who becomes like brought into the world of gambling dens due to the fact that she is bored as a fucking housewife. There's a story about this woman who sort of lost touch with a college best friend, and she's trying to understand why and how as they meet up later in their adult life. I think there is a searing sort of accuracy and a capturing of like the human condition, but specifically like for Asian American women from young, like childhood even to elderly, that Chang does really well. She occupies these perspectives and tells these stories in a way that feels authentic, true, immersive, and I think that is undeniable, I guess, in this short story collection. I just don't think that, like, they weren't all for me, I guess. Or it's not even that, it's that, like, it wasn't a book that I, like, felt like I was, like, needing to tear through the way that other short story collections have been for me in the past. I feel like I have better luck with speculative fiction short story collections than I do with realistic fiction short story collections, to be honest, which kind of leads me to my next book, which is Word Puppets by Mary Robinette Kowal, which I still rated 3.5 stars, but it's more 4 leaning than 3, I guess. Because I use Goodreads, I kind of round up or down when I have a 0.5 star rating, and for Tomb Sweeping, I rated it, I pressed the 3-star button, whereas in Word Puppets, I pressed the 4-star button, so that kind of indicates, like, is it a 3.54 star or is it a 3.53 star, you know? Anyways, that's kind of ridiculous, but that's my approach. Basically, Mary Robinette Kowal is kind of a genius. Like, she and Brandon Sanderson wrote this book together, not this book that I'm talking about, wrote a book called The Original together, and I read it years ago and I thought it was so good. This book does a thing where it's fantasy and science fiction. It sort of oscillates between the two in a way that feels kind of Le Guin-esque, but not at that level, of course. It feels very contemporary and of the moment, but it's also arranged in the order of, like, earliest written in her career to most recently written in her career. And to be honest, I think I like the stories that were at the beginning of the book, like, that were more earlier on in her career than I do the latter bits. Because the very last story is about this astronaut lady and her dying husband, and it was good, but it wasn't necessarily as compelling per se as the short story that was kind of a retelling of Rapunzel that I thought was kind of clever and fun, or even the first short story that does the timeline jumping thing from the perspective of this really badass, like, woman warrior. That was really cool, in my opinion. Like, I thought it was great. I think that there were other stories in here that were really compelling and interesting. Like, there was one about a puppeteer and sort of a technology involving puppets and, like, being in a dog suit, kind of, but via virtual reality remote control of the dog. Very interesting. There was a story in here from the perspective of a documentarian for this kind of large moth-like creatures who speak a human language, who one of them is, like, on this mission to not become a moth and just wants to stay a grub forever or something, and everyone in his community is like, dude, no, like, you're gonna die unless you turn into a fucking moth, you know? It's kind of funny in that way. Another sort of more funny and quirky story is about a chickadee clock thing, like clockwork chickadee. So it's like, da-ding, like the spring goes out, and, like, the perspective of the different spring run clockwork animals in a house and, like, their interactions with each other with this mouse as well. A lot of, like, quirky stuff that is written well, like, it's compelling and well done, and, like, it's the kind of SFF that doesn't take itself too seriously, I don't think, yet it's still good, and I liked it. I liked it a fair amount, so yeah. Okay, those are all eight of the books that I read in January. I hope you enjoyed my reviews of them, and if you want the full-length reviews of the first 5 books I talked about, they are in my bindery newsletter that are, you know, that's in the description, so you should join my bindery if you would like to. I mean, why not? But if not, it's fine as well. Thank you for being here, just in general, regardless. Thanks for watching this video, and if you got to this part of the video, I like doing this because it's fun to see, like, people who watch the whole way through. You should leave me a cake emoji in the comments, because why not? Cake is yummy and good, like, almost all of the time. I will see you in my next video, hopefully. If you want to stick around, if you haven't subscribed already, you should do that. But that's all I have for you today. Bye!